Caleb Moore came back to Blackwell Pack with snow on his shoulders and another alpha opening his door. It was the first time Caleb had crossed the Blackwell gate since the day Meredith removed the Luna collar. Marlowe lost his polished smile, and Elias drove him west toward the clinic. For one full second, the entire courtyard forgot how to breathe. The truck was old, navy blue, and dusted white along the hood, with a cracked windshield sticker from the county clinic and a tiny plastic dinosaur glued to the dashboard. It did not belong among the sleek black pack cars lined up near the main steps. Neither did the man who stepped out of it first. Dr. Elias Grant wore a wool coat, scuffed boots, and the calm expression of someone who had driven through a winter storm with medical bags sliding across the back seat and no patience left for pack politics. He walked around to the passenger side, opened Caleb's door, and waited. He did not pull. He did not command. He simply held out one hand and let Caleb decide. Rowan Blackwell saw that small mercy from the top of the steps, and it hurt more than any accusation Caleb could have thrown at him. Caleb accepted Elias's hand. Elias was not a claim. Not a replacement. He was the first person who had given Caleb shelter without asking what it made him owed. He moved carefully, not weakly, one boot touching the icy gravel, then the other. A blue scarf was wrapped around his throat. His hair, longer than Rowan remembered, was tucked behind one ear, and the old white bandage was gone from his wrist. In its place was a thin silver scar, almost hidden when his sleeves slipped down. Almost. Rowan noticed anyway. He had spent months noticing too late. Around him, the pack gathered in uneasy silence. Wardens stood near the gate. Nurses waited by the infirmary path. Meredith held a sleeping pup against her chest, her face pale with worry, no Luna collar at her throat. In the upstairs windows, children pressed close to the glass, their breath fogging the panes as they whispered Caleb's name like a prayer they were afraid to say too loudly. Caleb looked at the pack house, then at the nursery wing, and not once at Rowan. That was fair. Fairness, Rowan had learned, could still feel like punishment. Elias shut the truck door softly. Alpha Blackwell, he said. The title was polite. Distant. A fence built with only 2 words. Rowan nodded. Dr. Grant. His voice stayed steady because the pack needed it to stay steady, but inside him something old and desperate rose at the sight of Caleb standing beside another alpha, safe, rested, and no longer shaped around Rowan's comfort. Last spring, Caleb had left this house with a canvas bag, a wounded wrist, and a silence full of things Rowan had refused to hear. Now he had returned because winter fever had reached the children, because Mason had asked for him, because Caleb's love had always been stronger than the people who failed him. Meredith stepped forward first. 6 children are sick, she said. Mason is the worst. His fever rises whenever the northern stones flicker. Caleb's calm changed at the boy's name. Only a little. A breath caught behind his ribs. A soft tightening around his eyes. But Rowan saw it. He had once known every quiet language Caleb spoke with his face. Take me to him, Caleb said. No hesitation. No drama. Just that same gentle courage, sharpened now by boundaries he had learned somewhere far from Blackwell. The crowd parted as he walked toward the steps. It parted easily, respectfully, almost fearfully, and Rowan felt the shame of it settle deep. Caleb had carried this pack for years, and only after he walked away did they learn how to make room for him. When he reached the stairs, he passed close enough for Rowan to catch his scent. Rain. Clean cotton. Lavender soap. And beneath it, something new, warm and steady, like a clinic kitchen at sunrise. Elias. Rowan's hand tightened around the wooden ring in his coat pocket. The instinct to reach for Caleb came fast and painful, but he held still. He had learned one thing, at least. Love that arrived as a command was only another cage. Caleb paused beside him, eyes fixed on the nursery doors. Rowan wanted to say 1,000 things. I changed. I am sorry. I read every message you never sent. I kept your room untouched until I understood that waiting is not the same as earning. Instead, all he managed was, You came. Caleb finally looked at him. His gaze was quiet, not cold. That was worse. Mason called, he said. Then he walked inside, and Elias followed with the medical bags. Rowan stood in the open doorway as the house swallowed Caleb's footsteps again. He did not feel forgiven. He did not feel chosen. He felt like a man watching sunlight return to a room he had no right to enter. In the nursery, Mason lay under 3 quilts, cheeks flushed, one small hand curled around the blue cup he had kept for months. His eyes opened when Caleb knelt beside him. For a moment, the boy only stared. Then his mouth trembled. "You took a long time," he whispered. Caleb's face softened until every adult in the room looked away from the tenderness of it. He brushed damp hair from Mason's forehead. "I know," he whispered. "I am here now." Mason held onto his sleeve, and Caleb led him. At the doorway, Rowan watched the Omega he had lost become home to someone else's fear, and understood the truth with terrible clarity. Caleb had not come back because Blackwell deserved him. He had come back because some love survives even after it stops belonging to you. Caleb did not look back after Mason took his sleeve. He could feel Rowan in the doorway the way a room feels the cold when a window has been left open, but he kept his attention on the child in front of him because that was safer. Mason's fingers were hot and damp, curled tight in the blue fabric as if Caleb might disappear again if he blinked too slowly. "You are taller," Caleb said softly, trying to smile. Mason frowned with great effort, his fever-bright eyes serious. "You missed my birthday." The words were small, but they landed hard. Caleb's hand stilled on the thermometer. Shame rose in him before he could stop it, old and obedient, ready to apologize for surviving somewhere else. Then Elias set a medical chart on the bedside table with a quiet tap, not interrupting, only grounding the room. Caleb breathed in. "I did," he said. "And I am sorry. I thought about you that day." Mason's lower lip trembled. "I saved you cake." Meredith, standing near the foot of the bed, pressed one hand over her mouth. Rowan looked away. Caleb's throat tightened around something too tender to name. "Was it chocolate?" Mason nodded. "With blue frosting. Meredith said it would not mail good." "Meredith was right," Caleb whispered. "But I wish I could have seen it." Mason seemed to consider whether that was enough. Then his eyes drifted shut, not fully asleep, but soothed by the familiar rhythm of Caleb's voice. Caleb checked his temperature, listened to his breathing, and asked Meredith for the fever log. Everything in him wanted to move efficiently, to become useful before feelings could catch up. But the nursery was full of memories. The rocking chair by the window still had the scratch on one arm from when Peter had tried to carve his initials with a safety pin. The shelf still leaned slightly because Rowan had promised to fix it, and Caleb had quietly fixed it himself the next morning. The curtains were new, soft yellow instead of old gray, but one corner had been sewn unevenly. Caleb knew Meredith had done that. He could tell by the careful, nervous stitches. "You changed the room," he said before he meant to. Meredith glanced at him as if expecting judgment. "The children said Gray felt lonely." Caleb nodded. "They were right." A silence followed, not uncomfortable exactly, but full of things no one knew how to place. Rowan stepped in only far enough to hand Elias a printed report. He did not come near the bed. He did not touch Caleb's shoulder. He did not say Mason needs the blue cup or he gets scared of the dark, because Caleb already knew, and Rowan had finally learned that knowing a thing did not make it his to explain. Elias read the report, his brow narrowing. "These fever spikes line up with boundary fluctuations almost to the minute." Meredith looked toward the window. Outside, beyond the frosted glass, the northern stones pulsed weakly through the trees. "The wardens replaced the stones last spring," Rowan said. "They have been stable for months." Caleb kept his eyes on Mason, but a cold thread moved through him. "Stable does not mean healed." Rowan's voice lowered. "What does that mean?" Caleb did not answer immediately. He reached for Mason's small wrist to check his pulse, and that was when he saw it. A faint pale blue mark beneath the child's skin, shaped almost like a tiny crescent, glowing once before fading. Caleb's breath caught. Elias saw it too. His easy expression vanished. "Caleb," he said quietly, "move your hand." Caleb did. The mark disappeared completely. Meredith whispered, "What was that?" Rowan took one step forward before stopping himself. Caleb looked at the place where the glow had been, then down at the old scar on his own wrist. For one dizzy second, the room tilted backward in time. The scent stones. The pain. Elder Marlowe's polite smile. The way the boundary had always steadied when Caleb bled, when Caleb prayed, when Caleb gave more than anyone asked aloud. Mason stirred and murmured in his sleep. "Blue light." Caleb went still. "Mason," he whispered, "when did you see blue light?" The boy's lashes fluttered. "When I said your name," he breathed. It got quiet. No one spoke after that. Even the heater seemed to fall silent. Rowan's face strained of color, and Elias closed the chart with slow, careful hands. Caleb stared at the child, then at the window where the northern stones flickered once in the distance, soft and waiting, as if something buried under Blackwell land had finally realized he was home. The nursery became too crowded after Mason whispered that the blue light got quiet when he said Caleb's name. Meredith sent the other children to the playroom with warm blankets and crackers. Elias asked for quiet. Rowan ordered the hallway cleared, and for once, no one argued. Still, Caleb felt every stare lingering through the closed door, every old question pressing against the wood. Why him? Why now? Why had the stones waited months to answer? He stood by Mason's bed, one hand wrapped around his own scarred wrist, trying not to feel like a wound that had learned to walk back into the house that made it. "I need the original boundary records," Elias said. "Not the public copies." "The old ones?" Rowan's expression tightened. "They are in the archive vault." Elias looked at Caleb. "Do you want to come?" Caleb should have said no. The vault was underground, beneath the council wing, a narrow room of stone shelves, old paper, and cold air. It was also where Elder Marlowe had taken him the first time he said Caleb's bond was useful enough to save everyone else. But Mason's fever was rising again, and the blue crescent had not been imagination. Caleb nodded. "I will go." Rowan's gaze moved to him, careful and pained. "The archive hallway is narrow. The lower door sticks. If you would rather wait here, I can bring up whatever Dr. Grant needs." It was a small offer. Practical. Gentle, even. Months ago, Caleb would have taken it as proof of tenderness, and ignored the way it placed Rowan between him and the truth. Now he heard something else in it. Fear. Rowan was afraid the vault would hurt him. Or afraid of what the vault would reveal. Caleb lifted his chin. "I said I will go." Rowan accepted the correction with a quiet nod. No defense. No command. Just space. The three of them walked down the back stairs in silence. Elias went first with a flashlight and his medical bag. Caleb followed, counting each step because the stairwell smelled of dust and old cedar, and memory could be a cruel thing in tight spaces. Rowan came last, far enough behind that Caleb did not feel crowded, close enough that the warmth of his presence touched the back of the silence. At the bottom, the archive door refused to open on the first pull. Elias tried once, then muttered, "Very dramatic for a door." Caleb almost smiled despite himself. Rowan stepped forward. "It swells in winter. You have to lift before turning." He reached past Caleb, not touching him, only placing one hand on the iron latch. For a breath, they were trapped between the door and the wall, Elias's flashlight beam cutting gold across the stone, Rowan's arm beside Caleb's shoulder, his scent restrained but familiar. Pine. Cold rain. The ghost of a home Caleb had once mistaken for forever. Caleb's pulse betrayed him with one quick, uneven beat. Rowan heard it. Of course he did. But he did not look pleased. He looked ashamed. He opened the door and stepped back at once. "Sorry," he said softly. Caleb hated that the apology helped. Inside, the vault was colder than the hallway. Elias began pulling ledgers. By year, setting them on the table with careful hands. Rowan lit the wall lamps, their amber glow trembling over shelves packed with Blackwell history. Caleb stayed near the entrance until something caught his eye. A narrow drawer, half hidden behind a stack of ceremonial maps. Its brass label was scratched almost clean, but one word remained. Luna. Caleb reached for it. Rowan noticed. That drawer was sealed before my father died. Convenient, Elias said from the table. Rowan gave him a look. Elias shrugged. I said it quietly. Caleb opened the drawer. Inside lay a thin book bound in cracked blue leather. No title. No family crest. Only a faded ribbon tied around it with careful, feminine knots. When Caleb touched the cover, the old scar on his wrist warmed. Not pain. Recognition. The wall lamps flickered. Rowan moved instinctively, one step closer, then stopped himself. Caleb? Caleb opened the book. The first page held a hand-drawn map of the northern ridge, and beneath it, a sentence written in ink so faded it looked like breath on glass. The stones do not answer the crown. They answer the keeper. Elias leaned over his shoulder, reading silently. Rowan stood very still. Caleb turned the page. There, pressed flat between two sheets of brittle paper, was a dried sprig of lavender and a list of names. Every keeper of Blackwell's boundary for the last 100 years. None of them had been official Lunas. None had come from noble houses. At the bottom, in Marlowe's precise handwriting, was the final entry. Caleb Moore. Suitable temporary vessel until public Luna is secured. The room seemed to lose all sound. Caleb stared at the words, waiting for anger, but what came first was humiliation. Quiet, burning, familiar. Not because they had used him. He knew that already. Because they had written it down like he was inventory. Rowan reached for the ledger, then stopped with his hand hovering in the air. May I? Caleb looked at him. The question was so late. So small. So necessary. He handed him the book. Rowan read the line once. Then again. His face changed by inches, the cold alpha mask cracking into something raw and private. Elias watched him carefully, not cruelly, but without mercy. There is your proof, Elias said. He was never the substitute. Meredith was. Rowan looked at Caleb then, and the pain in his eyes was almost too heavy to witness. Caleb stepped back before it could pull him under. Do not look at me like that, he whispered. Like what? Like regretting it enough will make me less tired. Rowan closed the book with shaking care. For a moment, he looked like he might say he was sorry again. Instead, he moved to the narrow archive window and pulled off his own coat, laying it over the cold chair beside Caleb without touching him. Sit down, he said quietly. Not because you are weak. Because you should not have to stand while reading how they hurt you. Caleb stared at the coat. Then at Rowan. Across the table, Elias caught the look and saw more than Caleb wanted him to see. His expression softened, but something guarded passed through it too. Caleb sat slowly, the old ledger open before him, the scar on his wrist warming beneath his sleeve, while somewhere above them, the nursery walls answered with one low, waiting pulse. The pulse from the nursery traveled through the floor like a question no one wanted to answer. Caleb felt it in the soles of his shoes, then in the old scar beneath his sleeve, a soft warmth that made the tiny hairs along his arm rise. Elias looked toward the ceiling. That was not a plumbing issue, unless your pipes are emotionally attached to him. Under any other circumstance, Caleb might have laughed. Instead, he stood too fast, and Rowan's coat slipped from his shoulders onto the chair. Rowan reached as if to catch it, then stopped himself, fingers closing around empty air. Caleb saw the restraint. He wished he had not. The gesture landed in the worst possible place, where old love and new caution still touched. They carried the blue ledger upstairs in silence. Elias tucked it under one arm like evidence. Rowan walked beside Caleb, not ahead of him, not behind him, and the careful distance felt louder than all the apologies he was not saying. By the time they reached the nursery hall, half the pack had gathered outside despite Rowan's orders. Whispers broke apart as Caleb approached. Someone said keeper. Someone else said vessel. Then an older council aide, one of Marlowe's loyal shadows, looked at Caleb's glowing wrist and whispered just loudly enough. So the fever started when he came back. Caleb stopped. It was not the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to him. His body knew how to survive big wounds. It was the small ones, delivered casually in familiar hallways, that found the soft places. Rowan turned before Caleb could speak. His voice stayed low, but the entire hallway heard it. No one will blame Caleb more for a sickness caused by this pack's secrets. The aide paled. Rowan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. If you are frightened, help carry blankets. If you are ashamed, start with silence. But if you speak about him like property again, you will leave this house before sunset. The hallway went still. Caleb stared at the floor because looking at Rowan would be dangerous. He was not ready to forgive him. Forgiveness was not that simple. But some part of him, the young part that had once waited by office doors with tea and hope, had always wondered what it would sound like if Rowan defended him in public. Now he knew. And knowing hurt. Elias glanced sideways at Caleb, saw too much, and said nothing. That was its own kind of mercy. Inside the nursery, the air was warmer than before, but Mason's fever had climbed. Meredith sat beside him, reading from a picture book upside down until one of the toddlers corrected her with grave disappointment. I know, she whispered, turning it around. I was testing you. The toddler did not look convinced. Caleb crossed to Mason's bed, and the boy's crescent mark appeared again, brighter this time beneath the skin of his wrist. The wall behind the bed answered. One thin line traced itself through the plaster, then another, forming a shape Caleb recognized from the ledger map. The northern ridge. Elias opened the book with quick hands. The stones are routing through the children. Meredith's face went white. What does that mean? Caleb understood before Elias answered. The boundary, starved of its keeper for months and patched with the wrong rituals, had searched for the next nearest bond. The nursery. The children Caleb had loved most. The replacement stones could hold the wall, but not the memory of the bond. When winter pressure came, the boundary searched for the nearest living attachments Caleb had left behind, the children. His knees nearly weakened, but he stayed standing. Rowan saw the truth cross his face. Caleb. He said his name like a warning and a plea. Caleb shook his head. Do not. You are thinking of taking it back into yourself. Elias closed the ledger sharply. Absolutely not. That is my official medical opinion and also my unofficial opinion as a person with functioning common sense. If I do nothing, they keep burning through it, Caleb said. His voice was too calm. That scared him. Rowan stepped closer, then stopped at the edge of the rug. Then we find another way. Caleb looked at him. Blackwell never found another way when it was only hurting me. The words landed hard enough that Meredith looked down. Rowan did not defend himself. He only nodded once, as if accepting the sentence was the least he owed. Then let me be late without being useless, he said. Caleb had no answer for that. The light behind Mason's bed brightened, and the child stirred, whispering in his sleep. Not Caleb's name this time. Rowan's. Everyone heard it. Mason's hand lifted weakly toward the doorway, toward the Alpha who had spent months learning how not to reach for what he had lost. The glow jumped from the wall to Rowan's wooden ring, still in his pocket, bright enough to shine through the fabric. Elias went very still. Caleb looked at Rowan's coat, then at the wall, then at the child between them. Rowan slowly pulled the ring from his pocket. The carved wood was glowing from the inside, as if it had been waiting for this moment longer than either of them had. Meredith whispered, I thought you said it was never a promise. Caleb could not take his eyes off the ring. Rowan's voice broke softly in the quiet. Maybe the stones knew I was lying. The nursery went silent around the glowing ring. Even the children seemed to understand that something old had stepped into the room, something larger than a fever and quieter than a confession. Rowan held the wooden circle in his open palm, and Caleb remembered the night it was made so clearly it felt unfair. Snow had buried the patrol cabin up to the window ledge. The old heater had clicked like it was giving up on life. Caleb had been wrapped in Rowan's coat, trying not to shiver, while Rowan carved a strip of fallen birch with a pocket knife because they had run out of things to say that did not sound like longing. Caleb had teased him for making the first ring too small. Rowan had pretended to be offended, then made another one with such careful focus that Caleb had looked away before Hope made a fool of him. It is not a promise, Rowan had said. Caleb had smiled like the words had not hurt and answered, "Then I will not ask it to be." Now the ring glowed between them, steady and impossible, as if the boundary itself had kept the question Caleb was too proud to ask and Rowan was too afraid to answer. Elias broke the silence first. "I hate to interrupt a haunted jewelry moment," he said, his voice gentle despite the dry words. "But if that thing is connected to the stones and Mason is still running a fever, we need to understand what it wants before everyone starts making emotionally terrible decisions." Caleb let out a breath that was almost a laugh. It helped. Not enough, but a little. Meredith moved to the closet for more blankets, busying her trembling hands. Rowan lowered himself into the chair beside Mason's bed, not as alpha, not as a ruler, but like a man who had finally found a place to put his guilt where it might become useful. The ring's light softened when he sat close to the child. Mason's breathing eased. Caleb saw it. So did everyone else. "It is not only my bond," Caleb whispered. "It never was." Rowan looked up. Caleb's eyes stayed on Mason, because that was easier than looking directly at the regret in Rowan's face. "I thought Blackwell needed me because I was convenient. Per Omega. No parents. Sick little sister. Grateful enough to say yes when the right people smiled." His voice stayed quiet, but the room seemed to lean toward it. "When Nora and I first came here, I kept a grocery receipt in my shoe. For 3 weeks because I was afraid someone would say we cost too much. It was $11.48. Peanut butter, instant oatmeal, store-brand cough drops. I remember the exact amount because I thought if I could pay it back, maybe no one would send us away." Meredith's face crumpled. Elias looked down at the chart in his hands, jaw tight. Rowan closed his fingers around the glowing ring, but he did not interrupt. Caleb gave him that much credit. Months ago, he would have tried to soften the story before it got sharp enough to cut him. "Your father let us stay," Caleb said. But staying always felt temporary. Like sleeping on a couch and folding the blanket perfectly every morning so nobody remembered you had needed it. Across the room, one of the older children whispered, "My mom does that when rent is late." The comment was so small, so American in its ordinary heartbreak, that Caleb had to close his eyes for a second. Rent. Groceries. Medicine. The quiet math of being afraid. It was not dramatic. It was exhausting. Rowan's voice came low. "I did not know you felt that way." Caleb finally looked at him. "You did not ask." There was no cruelty in it. Rowan flinched anyway. Mason stirred, his hot little hand reaching blindly until Caleb took it. The blue crescent on the child's wrist faded a shade. Rowan noticed, then placed the wooden ring on the blanket between Mason's hand and Caleb's. The light spread in a thin line, connecting all three of them without touching skin. Elias leaned closer, professional focus returning. "There it is." "What?" Meredith asked. Elias tapped the old ledger. "The keeper anchors the boundary, but the alpha must consent to share the weight. The council cut Rowan out, and used Caleb alone because it was easier to control one exhausted person than two bonded ones." The words settled like dust after a collapse. Caleb stared at the ring, the old scar on his wrist warming, not burning this time. Rowan looked as if someone had taken the last excuse from his hands. "So every time the stones hurt you," he said, voice rough, "they were also avoiding me." Caleb swallowed. "Maybe. Or maybe you were avoiding yourself." Rowan accepted that too. Slowly, he set his hand near the ring, not touching Caleb, not claiming Mason, only offering his share of the burden at last. The line of light moved up the wall in a pattern like a heartbeat. Mason's fevered breathing steadied. For one fragile moment, hope entered the room so quietly no one dared name it. Then the nursery lights flickered, and the emergency speaker crackled overhead. An old recorded voice, distorted by static, filled the hall. "Northern boundary instability escalating. Full breach estimated within 1 hour." Meredith went pale. Elias muttered, "Of course it has a deadline." Caleb looked at Rowan, and the ring brightened between them, patient and impossible. The choice Blackwell had stolen from them years ago had returned. This time, everyone was watching. The words from the emergency speaker did not fade right away. They hung in the nursery, thin and mechanical, while every adult in the room silently counted the meaning of 1 hour. Caleb looked at the ring on Mason's blanket, then at Rowan's hand resting near it, close enough to share the light but still careful not to touch. Months ago, that restraint would have felt impossible. Now it only made the choice harder. Meredith moved first, gathering the children into coats and slippers, telling them they were taking a very boring safety walk to the inner hall. One little girl asked if boring safety walks came with cookies. Elias said, "In a civilized society, yes," and handed her a pack of animal crackers from his medical bag. The joke earned one shaky giggle, but the fear stayed. News had already reached the pack house faster than reason. By the time Caleb stepped into the hall, whispers had become full sentences. Keeper recognized. Alpha bond incomplete. Caleb came back and the boundary opened. Dr. Grant brought him here. Rowan chose him again. No one said the worst things directly to Caleb's face. They did not have to. The words moved around him like cold air under a door. Elias walked beside him, quiet for once, and Rowan followed a few steps behind with the ledger in one hand and the ring in the other. That distance became its own rumor. In the main foyer, 3 wardens stood with packed emergency kits. Meredith began assigning families to interior rooms. She was pale, but steady. Caleb admired that more than he wanted to. She had been handed a crown once, then learned to serve without it. Near the staircase, a woman Caleb recognized from the laundry staff hugged her son close and stared at his glowing wrist. "Is he going to take from the children again?" she whispered. Caleb stopped as if the floor had tilted. Again. The word reached into him and twisted. He knew she was afraid. He knew fear made people unfair. Still, shame came faster than logic. His sleeve slid down, hiding the scar, but not quickly enough. Rowan's voice cut through the foyer. "Caleb has never taken from anyone in this house." The woman flinched. Rowan's face was calm, but the calm was colder than shouting. "What was taken came from him." Silence spread outward. Caleb should have felt defended. A part of him did. Another part, the tired part, wished Rowan had not said his name like a banner in front of everyone. Sometimes being protected in public felt too close to being displayed. Elias seemed to sense it. "Caleb," he said softly, "come breathe for a second." Rowan turned, and for a small, painful moment, his expression closed. Not anger exactly. Not jealousy, though that was there too, buried under discipline. It was the look of a man realizing he was not the person Caleb stepped toward when he needed air. Caleb saw it, and hated that it hurt him. He followed Elias into the narrow coat room off the foyer, a cramped little space that smelled of wool, boot salt, and cedar blocks. The door did not fully close, leaving a thin line of noise from the hall. Elias leaned against the shelves and looked at Caleb with the tired kindness that had once saved him at a bus stop. "You do not have to do this." Caleb let out a quiet laugh with no humor in it. "The boundary opens in less than an hour." "That is not what I said." Caleb looked down at his hands. Nora was safe at the clinic, asleep under Nurse Bell's watch, and still Caleb felt 15 again the moment Blackwell's doors opened. They were trembling now that no one else could see. Elias did not reach for them. He never did without asking. That was why the next thing he said hurt so much. "If you walk away, I will drive you. Right now. West Road, County Line, Clinic, anywhere. I mean it." Caleb stared at him. "The children are here." "I know. Mason is here." "I know." Elias's voice stayed gentle. "But I need you to hear at least one person say that your life still belongs to you, even when people you love are scared." Caleb closed his eyes. For 1 second, the offer was unbearable. It did not tempt him to abandon anyone. It reminded him that someone had finally loved him without turning his compassion into a leash. In the hallway, Rowan's voice lowered, speaking to a warden. Caleb caught only part of it. "If the bond requires a choice, it has to be his. No pressure. No counsel. No ceremony." Another voice answered, sharp with panic. "And if he refuses?" There was a pause. Then Rowan said. Then we protect him anyway. Caleb opened his eyes. Elias had heard it too. Something passed across the doctor's face, small and guarded. Respect, maybe? Grief, maybe? Before either of them could speak, the coatroom door opened wider. Meredith stood there, holding Mason's blue cup in both hands. Her eyes moved from Caleb to Elias, and the misunderstanding was immediate, human, and painful. "I am sorry," she said too quickly. "I thought you were alone." Caleb stepped back as if caught doing something wrong, though there was nothing to catch. Elias straightened. Meredith looked embarrassed, then worse, hopeful in a way that made Caleb's stomach drop. "If you need to leave with him after this," she whispered, "I will understand." The words were kind. They made a future out of a moment Caleb had not chosen yet. In the hall, the speaker crackled again. "Northern boundary instability escalating. Full breach estimated within 40 minutes. Caleb took the blue cup from Meredith because his hands needed something ordinary to hold. The ceramic was chipped near the rim from years of small accidents. He traced the chip with his thumb and realized, with a quiet ache, that everyone was waiting for him to prove who he loved by deciding who he would save. That was when Caleb's face went calm in the old, dangerous way. Elias noticed first. "Caleb." Caleb moved past him into the hall. Rowan looked up at once. The ring in his hand brightened as Caleb approached, but Caleb did not take it. He gave Mason's cup to Meredith. "Get the children to the inner hall," he said. Rowan's eyes sharpened. "What are you going to do?" Caleb looked toward the northern doors, where cold light pulsed beneath the frame like a waiting storm. "Something I should have done a long time ago." Then he turned away from both alphas and walked toward the boundary alone. Caleb heard Rowan call his name once, then stop himself. That single silence followed him harder than a command would have. The northern doors opened to a wash of cold air, sharp enough to sting his eyes and turn every breath white. Snow had begun again, soft at first, drifting across the courtyard in thin silver threads. The path to the Borderstones was the same path he had walked last spring with a canvas bag on his shoulder and a wooden ring left behind on a desk. Back then, leaving had felt like tearing himself away from a house that never noticed it was holding him. Now every window was lit. Every face was watching. Caleb almost laughed at the unfairness of it. He had spent 7 years invisible, and now even his pain had an audience. Halfway to the gate, Rowan caught up, not close enough to stop him, only close enough to be heard. "Caleb." Caleb kept walking. "Do not follow me if you are going to ask me to save everyone." Rowan's answer came quietly. "I am following because I am afraid you will try to do it alone." That made Caleb stop. The snow settled on his lashes, cold and delicate. For a moment he stared at the first sandstone by the gate, its light flickering like a tired heartbeat. Then he turned. Rowan stood several feet behind him with no coat, the wooden ring glowing in his open hand. He looked nothing like the untouchable alpha who had once placed a crown on someone else while Caleb bled through a bandage. He looked cold. Human. Too late. "I was alone the first time," Caleb said. Rowan swallowed. "I know." "No, you do not." The words came out soft, but they carried across the snow. "You know the records now. You know Marla lied. You know the stones used my bond. But you do not know what it felt like to stand outside your office with blood under my sleeve and hear you tell the council Meredith was the future of the pack." Rowan's face tightened, but he did not look away. Caleb wished he would. It would have been easier to keep speaking to the old version of him. "I kept thinking you would notice," Caleb said. "That is the embarrassing part. Not the pain. Not even the way they called me temporary. It is that I kept making excuses for you because I loved you too much to admit you were choosing not to see me." Rowan's hand closed around the ring. "You are right." The old instinct to explain rose in him. He almost said the council had cornered him, that duty had been complicated, that he had been young. Then he saw Caleb's face and let the excuses die. Caleb waited for more. A defense. A reason. Some broken piece of childhood or duty or alpha pressure laid at his feet like an explanation. Rowan gave him none. "I was a coward," he said. The snow fell between them. Behind Rowan, Elias had stopped near the steps with Meredith and the wardens. He did not come closer. He only watched, one hand resting on his medical bag, letting Caleb stand inside his own choice. That steadiness hurt in a different way. Caleb looked from Elias to Rowan, and the truth he had avoided all day rose with a cruel, simple clarity. One man had taught him safety. The other still felt like home, even after home had failed him. "I cannot be the answer to your regret," Caleb whispered. Rowan's eyes shone, but his voice stayed steady. "I am not asking you to be." He stepped forward just once, then held out the wooden ring across the space between them. "This belongs to you." Caleb stared at it. The light moved inside the wood like a small trap dawn. "You kept it for months." "I kept it because I was selfish," Rowan said. "Then I kept it because I was learning what it meant." Caleb's fingers trembled when he took the ring. The moment it touched his palm, every stone along the gate flared bright, not violently, not with pain, but with recognition so deep it stole the breath from his lungs. For one impossible second, Caleb saw memories that were not fully his. Nora asleep beside a borrowed inhaler. Mason's first night in the nursery. Meredith unclasping the silver collar. Rowan sitting alone at Caleb's old desk, reading messages that had never been sent. And beneath it all, the border waiting. Not for blood. For truth. Caleb looked down at the ring in his hand and understood. The boundary had never needed him to suffer. It had needed the lie to end. His knees weakened, but he did not fall. Rowan moved on instinct, then stopped so sharply it looked painful. "May I?" he asked. 2 words. Small enough to fit inside the space where a command used to live. Caleb closed his eyes. The answer rose before fear could bury it. "Yes." Rowan stepped close and held him by the elbows, steady, careful, warm through the cold. Nothing more. Somehow that was enough to break something open in Caleb's chest. He did not lean into him. He did not pull away. He simply stood there, being held without being claimed, while the stones burned brighter around them. From the pack house, the emergency speaker crackled one final time. "Keeper recognized. Alpha bond awaiting Val." Caleb opened his eyes. Rowan went still. The entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. "Stay," Rowan almost said, the old command rising by instinct. He swallowed it so hard it looked painful. "Please be careful," he said instead. Caleb looked at the glowing ring, then at Rowan, then past him to Elias, who lowered his gaze with a sadness kind enough not to ask for anything. Caleb's voice, when it came, was barely louder than the falling snow. "I cannot make a vow just because everyone is afraid." Rowan nodded, and the acceptance in his face hurt worse than pleading. Caleb took one step back, the ring still warm in his palm. Then the northern gate unlocked with a soft metal click, and the stones beyond it lit one by one, marking a narrow path into the dark trees. Caleb stepped through the northern gate alone, and no one followed. That was the first consequence of his choice. Not the lights spilling across the snow. Not the boundary stones waking. One after another like stars remembering their names. The true consequence was silence. Rowan stood on the wrong side of the gate with his hands empty, because the ring was with Caleb now, and for once the pack did not look to him for an order he had no right to give. The path closed behind Caleb without a sound. One moment he was there, small and steady beneath the falling snow. The next, the dark trees held only the shape of his absence. Meredith covered her mouth with one hand. Elias closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again as if he had already known love sometimes meant staying outside the door. Rowan did not move until Mason's voice called from the front steps, thin and frightened. "Did Caleb leave again?" No one answered quickly enough. That was answer enough. Rowan turned and saw the children gathered under blankets, their faces pale in the cold doorway. Mason clutched the blue cup against his chest with both hands, as if it were the last piece of Caleb the house had not lost. Rowan walked back slowly. Every step felt measured by all the times he had walked away from Caleb without knowing that leaving could become a language. "He went to fix the boundary," Meredith said gently. Mason looked at Rowan instead. Children knew when adults were softening the truth. Alone? Rowan knelt in the snow before him. It soaked through his trousers almost immediately, cold and humiliating and deserved. Yes, he said. Because the rest of us taught him that was the only way to be heard. Meredith looked away. Elias stared toward the sealed gate, jaw tight. Around them, the pack stood quiet under porch lights and winter sky, and Rowan understood that public reputation was a thin coat in weather like this. It could not warm a child. It could not hold a shaking hand. It could not call an exhausted Omega back from that frozen road. Inside the pack house, the children were moved to the inner hall, but no one slept. The fever eased as the boundary stabilized, inch by inch, breath by breath. That should have brought relief. Instead, every calm breath from the nursery became proof of what Caleb was still giving them from somewhere no one could see. Rowan went to Caleb's old room because grief had made him useless everywhere else. The room had changed since Caleb left, but not enough. Meredith had moved most of Caleb's things into storage only after asking the children. Mason had insisted the desk stay. On it sat the photograph Caleb had sent months ago, the one outside the border clinic, with wind in his hair and peace sitting awkwardly on his shoulders like something he was still learning to wear. Beside it was a small stack of construction paper cards from the nursery. Happy birthday, Caleb, written in 6 different colors. Come visit soon. Meredith says carrots are still illegal. Rowan touched the edge of one card and felt something inside him fold. He had once thought love was proven in private tenderness. Tea outside a door. A coat over shoulders. A ring carved by firelight and denied before it could become dangerous. But tenderness hidden too long became another form of cowardice. Publicly, he had given Caleb nothing but absence. Privately, he had expected Caleb to survive on crumbs. Elias appeared in the doorway without knocking. The fever is down 2 degrees, he said. Mason is asking if blue light has a bedtime. Rowan almost smiled. Almost. What did you tell him? I told him blue light probably has poor boundaries. Rowan looked at him then, and for the first time, there was no jealousy left sharp enough to matter. Only gratitude and a hurt too old to disguise. You love him. Elias leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. He did not answer right away. Yes. The word was quiet. Clean. It did not challenge Rowan. That made it worse. And if he comes back? Rowan asked, though the question scraped on the way out. Will you ask him to leave with you? Elias looked at Caleb's photograph. I will ask him if he is hungry. Then I will ask if his wrist hurts. Then I will ask what he wants. Rowan closed his eyes. There it was. The difference. Not passion. Not history. Not a glowing ring or ancient stones or a bond written under Blackwell land. Just the everyday mercy of asking. Elias stepped closer and placed a folded paper on Caleb's desk. He left this in my truck before we came back. I think he meant to mail it, then changed his mind. Rowan looked down. His name was written on the front in Caleb's careful hand. He did not open it until Elias left. Inside was only 1 page. Rowan, if I come back, please do not make my return the proof that you changed. Let your change exist even if I never stand beside you again. I want to believe you can become kind without needing me to reward you for it. At the bottom, after a long blank space, Caleb had written one more line. I am so tired of being someone's lesson. Rowan sat at the desk until the words blurred. Outside the window, beyond the sleeping courtyard, the northern trees stood quiet beneath the snow. Somewhere inside that darkness, Caleb was carrying the truth Blackwell had buried. In the dark beyond the stones, Caleb had not bled. He had spoken. Name by name, lie by lie, he had returned every stolen vow to the earth until the border stopped asking children to carry what adults had buried. And for the first time in his life, Rowan did not pray for Caleb to come home. He prayed for Caleb to choose whatever place would never make him disappear to be loved. Caleb came back at dawn, when the pack house windows were still dark and the snow had softened into a quiet gray mist. No one saw him at first except Mason, who had refused to sleep in his bed and had curled up in the window seat with the blue cup tucked under his blanket. The boy sat up so fast the cup nearly fell. Outside, beyond the front steps, Caleb stood at the edge of the courtyard with the wooden ring in his hand and frost on his coat. He looked pale. Exhausted. Alive. Mason ran before anyone could stop him. By the time Rowan reached the foyer, the front doors were already open, and Mason was halfway across the snow in slippers, shouting Caleb's name like a promise he had never stopped believing in. Caleb dropped to his knees before the child reached him. The hug was small and fierce and painful to watch. Rowan stopped on the threshold. He did not step closer. He had learned that wanting to was not the same as being allowed. The boundary stones behind Caleb glowed steady now, not bright, not dramatic, just calm. Points along the trees. Whatever had happened beyond the gate had ended quietly. Maybe that was why it felt real. Caleb rose slowly with Mason wrapped around his waist and looked toward Rowan. For one fragile moment, the months between them, the ceremony, the letters, the ring, the lies, and the public apologies all stood in the snow together. Rowan wanted to ask if Caleb was all right. He wanted to ask if he was staying. He wanted so badly that his hands shook. Instead, he said, "You made it back." Caleb's tired mouth curved faintly. "I had to. Mason still owes me birthday cake." Mason sniffed against his coat. "It is freezer cake now." Elias appeared behind Rowan, hair rumpled, medical bag already in hand. "Freezer cake is a serious American institution," he said. "Often emotional. Sometimes icy in the middle." Caleb laughed softly. The sound was worn thin, but it was there. Rowan felt it pass through him like sunlight touching a room he had kept closed too long. Later, after Elias checked Caleb's wrist and Meredith cried in the pantry where she thought no one could hear her, Rowan found Caleb in the nursery. Mason had finally fallen asleep, one hand resting near the blue cup. Caleb sat beside the bed, the wooden ring on his palm. Its light had faded to an ordinary warm brown. "The boundary is stable," Caleb said without looking up. "It will need wardens, real ones. No keepers. No vessels. No secret debts dressed up as tradition." Rowan nodded. "It will have them." Caleb turned the ring once with his thumb. "And me?" The question was quiet enough to break him. Rowan sat in the chair across from him, leaving space between them. "You will have whatever you choose." Caleb looked at him then, searching for the trap that was no longer there. "That sounds practiced." "It is," Rowan admitted. "I have had months to practice not asking you to save me from what I did." Caleb's eyes lowered, and for a while there was only the soft breathing of children, the heater humming, the small ordinary noises of a house that had survived the night. "I loved you here," Caleb said. "In this room. In kitchens. In hallways. In all the places where no one made room for me." Rowan's throat tightened. "I know." "No," Caleb said gently. "You know now." He placed the wooden ring on the table between them, not giving it back, not keeping it either. "I cannot come home just because the house finally learned my name." Rowan closed his eyes once. When he opened them, he was still there. Still listening. "I understand." Caleb stood before his courage could fail him. At the doorway, Elias waited, not smiling, not victorious. Just present. Caleb looked at him, then back at Rowan. "I am going back to the clinic for a while. Maybe longer than a while." Rowan nodded. The old Rowan would have asked how long. The new one knew the question was another hand around the wrist. "Will you write?" he asked instead. Caleb considered it. Maybe. It was not a promise. Somehow, that made it honest. Spring arrived months later with muddy roads, tax forms on kitchen tables, and children complaining that vegetables tasted worse when the weather was nice. Blackwell changed slowly. Meredith became the person nervous pups looked for during storms, not because anyone crowned her, but because she stayed when the work was ordinary and no one was applauding. Elias visited once a month to train the infirmary staff and insult the toaster in the break room. Rowan kept Caleb's room unlocked but no longer untouched. The children used the desk for homework. The blue cup moved between the nursery and the kitchen, chipped, useful, loved. One afternoon, a letter came from the border clinic. Inside was a photograph of Caleb on the porch, laughing at something outside the frame, his sleeves pushed to his elbows, his scar visible in the sun. On the back, he had written, "I am not ready to return. But for the first time, I wanted you to know where I am." Rowan read it twice, then carried it to the window where the northern stones glowed faintly through the trees. He smiled, not because he had been forgiven, and not because the story had given him what he wanted. He smiled because Caleb had chosen a life that did not require disappearing. Far away, at the clinic, Caleb sealed another envelope and set it beside a cooling mug of coffee. He did not know whether love would lead him back to Blackwell, or forward into something gentler with Elias, or somewhere entirely his own. For the first time, that uncertainty did not frighten him. Outside, the morning road waited open and gold, and Caleb stepped into it without looking back to see who needed him.